The morning I signed the papers on my second restaurant location, I sat alone in my car for a long time before going inside. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the parking lot off Broadway with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the Nashville skyline turn gold in the early light. And I thought about my father. I thought about the way he used to say that a man's word was the only thing nobody could ever take from him. I believed that for most of my life. Then my brother took it anyway, and my father let him. But I am getting ahead of myself. I grew up working in my father's diner. It was a breakfast and lunch place in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Nothing fancy. Booths with cracked vinyl seats and a pie case up front that my mother restocked every morning before 6. My father built it from a lunch cart in the late 70s. By the time my brother and I were teenagers, it had a full kitchen, 8 tables, and a loyal crowd of regulars who came in every weekday without fail. It wasn't a gold mine, but it was ours, and my father was proud of every inch of it. My brother was 4 years younger than me. His name was Derek, and even as a boy, he had a particular talent for standing close to people who were doing work and making it look like he was helping. He was charming in the way that men who never fully grow up tend to be charming. He laughed easily. He told good stories. He had our father wrapped around his finger so completely that our father didn't even seem to notice the rope. I was the one who came in early. I was the one who stayed late to go over the books. I was the one who renegotiated with the supply vendors every spring and figured out how to stretch the margins another 0.5%. Not because I wanted credit for it, because that was my family's business, and I loved it. Derek showed up when it suited him. And Derek married Sandra when he was 29, which was the beginning of the end of everything. Sandra was the kind of woman who assessed every room she walked into and immediately identified who she could use and who she could not. She decided within the first year of her marriage that my father's diner had value she wasn't yet accessing, and that I was the primary obstacle between her and that value. I watched her work. I saw how she talked to my father when my mother wasn't in the room. I saw how she fed him little doubts about me, soft and incremental, the way you don't notice a leak until the ceiling comes down. It took her 3 years. I still don't know the full details of what she told my father. What I know is that one Thursday evening in October, my father called me into the back office and told me that he had been going over the accounts and there were discrepancies he couldn't explain. He had a folder in front of him. He slid it across the desk toward me, and he couldn't look me in the eye when he did it. The folder had printed bank statements with certain withdrawals circled in red marker. The withdrawals were real. The explanation Sandra had given my father for those withdrawals was not. Those withdrawals were vendor payments I had restructured to improve cash flow. I had told my father about every one of them. I had written notes, but the notes weren't in the folder. And by the time that conversation happened, my father had already decided what the story was. Derek was sitting in the corner of that office. He didn't say anything. He just watched. My father told me he needed some time away from me running the books. He said it carefully, the way a person speaks when they have rehearsed the words and are afraid of what comes out if they go off script. I asked him if he believed I had stolen from him. He said he didn't know what to believe. That was the worst answer he could have given me. I left that night. I drove home to my apartment and sat in the kitchen until 4 in the morning. And then I decided something. I decided I was not going to spend the rest of my life arguing with people who had already made up their minds about me. I packed 2 bags. I had $11,000 in a personal savings account that had nothing to do with the business. I had a 15-year-old truck and a recipe book I had been writing in since I was 19. I had 43 years of knowing exactly how to feed people well. I drove north. I ended up in Louisville, Kentucky, because I had a college friend there who let me sleep on his couch for 6 weeks while I looked for kitchen work. I got hired as a line cook at a barbecue place near the university. Within 8 months, I was running their prep operations and rewriting their sauce recipes. Within 2 years, I was their head cook and had saved enough to think seriously about my own place. I opened my first restaurant in 2016. It was a small room on the east side of Louisville. 12 tables, a walk-up counter, and a smoker I had built myself from a converted propane tank in the parking lot. I named it after nothing in particular. I called it Franklin's, which was not my name but sounded like it could be, and I liked the plainness of it. I had not spoken to my father in nearly a year by then. My mother called me on my birthday and at Christmas. Quiet calls that lasted 10 minutes and never mentioned Derek or the diner or what had happened. I did not push. She was caught between two things that were tearing her apart, and I understood that. My father died in the spring of 2019. My mother called me the morning after he passed. I drove down for the funeral and stood at the graveside and said goodbye to the man who had taught me everything I knew about work and almost nothing about how to protect yourself from the people who smile at you while they take what's yours. The will left the diner to Derek. I drove back to Louisville the same day. Derek ran the diner for 2.5 years before it closed. I heard this from my nephew Tyler, who was Derek and Sandra's oldest son, a quiet kid of 19 by then, who had figured out his parents faster than his grandfather ever had. Tyler had started texting me about 6 months after my father's funeral. He said he found my number in an old address book of my mother's. We talked carefully at first, then more openly. He was the one who told me when the diner finally shut its doors. He said Derek blamed the pandemic, the economy, the landlord, a supplier who had shortchanged them. He said Derek blamed everyone except the person who had driven the place into the ground one bad decision at a time. By that point, my restaurant had a 3-month wait for weekend reservations and a James Beard nomination that I neither expected nor asked for. A Nashville investor had approached me about opening a second location. I had said yes. I had signed those papers on that quiet morning in the parking lot, and by the time winter came around again, I was operating 2 full kitchens and had started thinking about a third. I had also, carefully and without urgency, been building a file. Tyler was not the only one who had stayed in contact with me over the years. An accountant who had worked part-time for my father for almost a decade, a woman named Mrs. Garrett, had kept a copy of everything from the period before I left. She had always believed the numbers told a different story than the one Sandra told my father. She had kept quiet because she was loyal to my father and did not want to cause him pain in his last years. After he passed, she felt differently. She sent me a package in the mail in the fall of 2020 that contained, among other things, copies of internal transfers that showed Derek had been moving money out of the business accounts for almost 4 years before I was accused of anything. Small amounts. Consistent. The pattern of someone who thought they were being careful. I gave everything to my attorney. We documented it thoroughly, and then we waited. I want to be clear about why I waited. People will read a story like this and wonder why I didn't take it directly to the family or to the authorities the moment I had the documents in hand. The answer is that documentation is not the same as a case, and a case against your own brother requires more than being right. It requires patience. It requires letting the other side believe they are safe. It requires understanding that people who have spent years lying to protect themselves will only reveal the full shape of their deception when they believe there is something worth lying for. I was patient for a long time, and then Derek gave me a reason to stop waiting. It was a Tuesday in late February when my restaurant manager called me to say that a man and a woman were in the dining room asking for me by name and saying they were family. I was in the Nashville kitchen at the time. In the dine, I told him to tell them I would be there within the hour. I knew who it was before I pulled into the parking lot. Derek had gained weight in the years since I had seen him. He was wearing a blazer over a flannel shirt, which on him looked less like a style choice and more like an attempt to look like someone who made decisions. Sandra was next to him. She had the posture of a person who has already decided how a conversation is going to go and is simply waiting for you to catch up. They were sitting at the best table in the room. Sandra had already ordered coffee. I sat down across from them and did not say anything right away. I let the silence sit there for a moment, which I have found over the years makes most people uncomfortable enough to say something they hadn't planned on. Derek said it had been a long time. I agreed that it had. He said he was proud of what I had built. Said he had followed it from a distance and always known I had it in me. He smiled, the same smile he had been using on people his whole life. I noticed that it no longer reached anything behind his eyes. Sandra asked if I remembered the conversations we used to have about expanding the family business. She said it as though those conversations had been warm and collaborative. which was not how I remembered them. She said she and Derek had been talking and they felt like there was a real opportunity here, given my success and given the name we shared, to do something together. A partnership. A family enterprise. She used the phrase family enterprise twice in about 90 seconds. I asked them what kind of partnership they had in mind. Derek leaned forward. He said he felt that given everything that had come from our father's diner, the work ethic, the recipes, the foundation, there was a reasonable argument that the Franklin's brand had roots in the family legacy, and that it wouldn't be unfair to think about how to honor that. I want you to understand what was being said here without being said. He was telling me that the name of my restaurant, the food I had spent 20 years developing on my own, the business I had built from $11,000 in a truck, was somehow connected to a family legacy that they now represented. He was telling me this at my table, in my restaurant, wearing a blazer he had probably bought for the occasion. Sandra added that they weren't looking for charity. They were looking for an arrangement that recognized the full picture. I told them I would need to think about it. I called Tyler that same night. He was quiet for a moment after I told him about the visit, and then he said there was something I needed to know. He said that in the weeks before they drove to Louisville, he had overheard his parents talking about a document, a letter that Sandra said she had, signed by my father, acknowledging that some portion of the family business knowledge and goodwill had been transferred to Derek and his heirs. Tyler said he wasn't sure if the document was real. I called my attorney immediately. What my attorney told me, after some investigation, was that there was indeed a document. It had been notarized 4 months before my father died, during a period when his health was declining and his clarity came and went. The document was vague in its language but specific enough to be used as the basis of a legal claim if someone was willing to push it. My attorney said that the document appeared to have been witnessed by 2 people, one of whom had since moved out of state and one of whom was Sandra's cousin. He said the document had problems. He said that was the good news. I told him I had no intention of letting it get to court. My restaurant's 10-year anniversary fell on the second Saturday of April. I had already been planning a dinner for 40 guests, longtime regulars, staff members, people who had been part of the business since the early days. I called my attorney, and I called Tyler, and I made some additions to the guest list. I invited Derek and Sandra. I told them I had given their proposal serious thought. I told them I believed there were real things worth discussing, and that I wanted to do it properly, at a dinner, where we could talk like family. Sandra's voice on the phone had the particular warmth of someone who believes they have already won. The evening of the dinner, I arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early. I stood in the kitchen and cooked the way I always cook when something important is happening, slowly, carefully, with full attention on every detail. My staff knew something was different about the night. I had briefed 3 of them. The rest of them would simply do their jobs and do them well, which they always did. Derek and Sandra arrived 20 minutes late, which I had expected. Derek had bought a new blazer for the occasion. Sandra was wearing something that suggested she believed this evening was a celebration of something that had already been decided. Mrs. Garrett was already seated at the far end of the table. She had driven up from Murfreesboro that afternoon. She was 71 years old and had the look of a woman who has been waiting a long time to say something true. My attorney was there. He had come as a guest. He sat near the middle of the table and talked easily with the people around him, and did not appear to be anything other than a man enjoying a good dinner. Tyler was there. He had driven himself, which he had not told his parents he was doing. When Derek saw his son already seated at the table, something moved across his face that he controlled quickly, but not quite quickly enough. I let the dinner go for a full hour. The food was good. The room was warm. Conversations moved the way they do when people are comfortable and well-fed. Then I stood up. I thanked everyone for being part of 10 years of something I had built from nothing. I talked about what it had meant to start over in a city where nobody knew me and build something real. I said that everything in that room, every recipe, every process, every relationship with every supplier and every regular who had walked through the door had come from work, from waking up early and staying late and learning from every mistake and never asking anyone to give me something I hadn't earned. I said I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge some family. Derek straightened slightly in his chair. Sandra put her hand on the table in a way that looked like she was steadying herself for something pleasant. I said that some years ago, when I was removed from my family's business, over accusations that were false, I made a decision. I said I had not, in the years that followed, done nothing. I said that I had been patient, and I had been thorough, and I had waited until I had everything I needed. I nodded to my attorney. He placed a folder on the table. I told Derek and Sandra, in a calm voice, in front of everyone at that table, what the folder contained. I explained the transfers. I explained the timeline. I explained what Mrs. Garrett had saved and what it showed. I explained the document they had brought to me as leverage and what my attorney had found about the circumstances under which it had been signed. I told them that I had spoken to the county's financial crimes unit 2 weeks prior, that the conversation had been informational in nature but had not ended there. The room was very quiet. Sandra's face had gone through several expressions and was now settled on something controlled and careful. Derek's had not settled on anything. He looked the way a person looks when they have walked confidently into a room and then realized it is not the room they thought it was. I told them that I was not going to pursue a civil claim against them, that I was leaving the matter of the transfers to the appropriate authorities, who were already aware of the situation and did not need my direction. I told them that as far as the document they had brought to me as a basis for a partnership claim, my attorney had prepared a response and they would be receiving it in writing within the week. I told them they were welcome to finish their dinner. They didn't finish their dinner. Sandra pushed back from the table and said something under her breath that I didn't catch. Derek stood up slowly, the way a man stands when his legs have gone uncertain under him. He looked at Tyler once, a long look that had something complicated in it. And Tyler looked back at him with the steady, sorrowful calm of a young man who has had a long time to make his peace with what his father was. They left. The room was quiet for about 10 seconds after the door closed. Then Mrs. Garrett, from the far end of the table, picked up her wine glass. And that was enough. The conversation came back gradually, the way sound comes back after something loud has passed. My staff moved through the room with the practiced ease of people who have been trained well and trust each other. Tyler sat with his hands wrapped around a glass of water, and I could see him breathing slowly and steadily, getting through something. I went and sat beside him after a few minutes. I didn't say anything immediately. That is a habit I have carried for a long time. The understanding that sometimes a person needs silence before they need words. He said he was sorry. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He said he felt like he should have said something sooner, should have found some way to stop what his parents had done before it cost me so many years. I told him that the years had not been wasted. I told him that everything I had built precisely because I had been forced to build it myself, from scratch, with no safety net and no borrowed credibility. I told him that being pushed out of a place where you were not valued is sometimes the best thing that can happen to you, even when it doesn't feel like it for a very long time. He asked me what came next. I told him I had been thinking about a third location. I said I was looking at Chattanooga. I said I could use someone who already understood the family history of what Franklin's meant, and who might be interested in learning the business properly, the full business, supply chain to line operations to books starting from the ground up. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said he had never been to Chattanooga. I told him neither had I. The first time I drove into Louisville with $11,000 and a recipe book. I told him that was entirely the point. In the months that followed, the financial authorities did what financial authorities do when the documentation is clean and the timeline is clear. The process was not fast, and it was not my business to manage. I had handed over what I had, and I let it go. What I know is that by the end of that year, Derek and Sandra were dealing with consequences that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with choices they had made over a long period of time. Tyler started with me in June. I put him in the kitchen first, because that is where I put everyone who works for me, regardless of what role they are eventually going to grow into. I believe you cannot understand what you are selling if you have never made it. He was a harder worker than I expected, which should not have surprised me. He had been surviving in a difficult household for 19 years. He knew how to keep his head down and pay attention. By the following spring, He was running prep on weekend mornings without supervision. By summer, he had started asking questions about the vendor relationships that showed he was thinking past the day-to-day. Those are the questions I had been waiting for. I still think about my father sometimes. I think about him more gently than I used to. He was a man who worked hard and loved his children and trusted the wrong one. That is a common tragedy and not a simple one. I have no interest in being angry at him anymore. He did not live to see what his other son had done, which might be a mercy, or might be something else. I am not sure. What I know is this. The diner my father built from a lunch cart did not survive. But the knowledge he gave me how to source good product, how to treat your regulars like the rare thing they are, how to run a kitchen with both discipline and care. That knowledge is in the food that comes out of my kitchens every single day. I sold nothing that mattered. I left with what could not be taken from me, and I built from that. There is a table in the Nashville location that my regular customers know is mine. It's near the back, close enough to the kitchen that I can hear how the line is running. On quiet Tuesday mornings, before the lunch service, I sit there with coffee and the week's numbers, and the particular satisfaction of a man who did not become bitter when he had every reason to. My father used to say that a man's word was the only thing nobody could take from him. I think he was close. I think the truth is closer to this. The things you know, really know, in the way that comes from years of practice and failure, and learning those things belong to you completely. You can be pushed out of rooms. You can be lied about. You can be cut off and left to start over in a cold city with not quite enough money and no guarantee of anything. But what you know comes with you every single time.